Only an England player could break their toe and still get called up. This is the Arsenal News Show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys and girls for another episode of what is the Arsenal News Show. Joining you every single morning at 8 a.m. UK time. Thank you as always for joining me and making this a part of your morning routines. It is incredibly appreciated. Good morning to those joining us in the chat box. Hope you're doing good. Hope you're doing well. Martin, Glenn, Matt G, Stevie, Tom, Wendy, Black Shine, Paul, Damien, Sweating Merlot, Rich, Arasilki, Jitty, Paul, Amesy, Amira, Adrian, Grantley Poos, Rob, and plenty more of you guys and girls as well. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. Good to see Owen in the chat box as well. Says, we didn't get an update on the golf trip, which makes me think that the scores were more depressing than Arsenal's current form. Anyway, good morning to the rest of you as well. Thank you for tuning in. Incredibly humbled, as always, to see so many of you in the chat. If you could drop a like, and if you're new, joining us perhaps for the first time, we do these every single day at the exact same time, rain or shine. So please do it. It's been a lot of rain, not in the weather world, in Arsenal's world. It's been a lot of rain, which is always very much more appreciative for your presence, for you being here when it isn't exactly the happiest period of any fan's life right now. Good morning, though, to everyone else. And without shadow of a doubt, let's get into today's stories. And we start with Thomas Partey, who was not called up to Ghana's squad for their upcoming AFCON qualifiers. The decision taken to give Partey a rest going into these games, it seems, which is certainly good news for Arsenal fans that were hoping that, you know, this international break, we wouldn't be too shaky and worrying about all of the players that are expected to travel and go into these fixtures. So good news that Ghana have not called up Thomas Partey for these games. So definitely a good sign. However, what's not great is that it's been confirmed that Declan Rice has indeed broken his toe. He broke his toe during the game against Newcastle, and that's why he missed the game against Inter Milan. The Independent and the Telegraph, and a lot of outlets have run this story. The Telegraph's Matt Law has said that Declan Rice is preparing to push through the pain barrier to try to play for Arsenal and England after breaking his toe. The midfielder has been included in Lee Carsley's England squad for the forthcoming Nations League internationals against Greece and the Republic of Ireland. Rice has been unable to train this week and could not put a boot on the foot of his injured toe. The midfielder, however, is ready to try and play through the pain barrier for Arsenal against Chelsea at Stamford Bridge on Sunday. So, yeah, not ideal that Declan Rice has indeed, you know, you can... It's not like any other bone in the body, really, when this happens. For anyone who's done it themselves, if you go and get checked out, unless there's a significant kind of compound fracture, which rarely happens with broken toes, usually you just kind of strap it up, hold it in place, attach it to another, kind of strap it next to another toe, because you can't really do much about a broken toe. It's just one of those things that you can't really do anything with. You just have to kind of strap it up and wait for it to heal. Of course, Declan Rice, it is mad to me, and I'll get the England team up on the screen. Bukayo Saka, of course, also being called up alongside Declan Rice. There's one more Premier League game, which I guess if you're going to play through pain barriers, great, do that. Why is he in the squad? Why is he playing? Why does he need to play for England? He doesn't need to play for England at all. He does not need to be there. So why would he play for England? It just is mad. Like, absolutely, like, it's so ridiculous that he's in this England squad. It'd surely be the perfect time with these types of injuries that are so innocuous that you get the importance of a Premier League game at Chelsea for sure. But England Nations League games, it should be taken as, and part of me thinks, should Declan Rice be turning around and saying, look, I shouldn't be called up for this. I want to use this 2 weeks to recover. You should be able to beat Greece. I say you should be able to beat Greece. Greece, of course, beat England at Wembley. And it's no disrespect to them, but with the quality available to England, they should still be able to win those two games. but Lee Carsley, not making a very smart decision at all. Sticking still with this story about Edu leaving Arsenal, my colleague at Football.London, Kai Kainak, has been doing some really good digging into this story and has produced a fantastic article on Football.London, which you can read the full transcript of, and I recommend that you go and do that as well. Just to give you a couple of excerpts from it. Edu's farewell speech to the players and staff took place on Tuesday morning in the dressing room, and it is understood it's to have been something of an emotional affair. The sentimentality, however, ended there. Edu is out of the WhatsApp groups that discuss transfers, player fitness, and the like. He will no longer be at games or the training ground as he serves a 6-month period of gardening leave. Arsenal are already focused on finding a replacement. It said that Edu's assistant sporting director, Jason Ato, is expected to step up. And we do know that the process will be led by Richard Garlick and Tim Lewis, with input from Mikel Arteta in finding that replacement for Edu. So that process is ongoing. It's also expected that they will be a sporting director. The person that takes on the role is not going to be a technical director, and Arsenal want to continue with this sporting director model. If you listen to the Athletics podcast with David Ornstein yesterday, and again, I recommend if you haven't, go back and listen to it. It was David Ornstein on with Art DeRoche as well. Fantastic two journalists there at the Athletic, talking about the wider context. James McNicholas as well, giving his input into things. Well, the sense is that, Arsenal will stick with the sporting director model. Of course, the sporting director was something Arsenal hadn't really had for a long time at Arsenal prior to Edu getting that role. So it's not something that they want to break away from. So let's wait and see. Mikel Arteta, though, is expected to face the media today ahead of Arsenal's game against Chelsea. He will therefore give updates on Declan Rice. He will give updates on the rest of the squad as well. We need to hear about Martin Ødegaard. We need to hear about Ricardo Calafiori, of course, as well, and any other issues that might indeed have arisen from the game against Inter Milan. The press conference is this afternoon, early afternoon. If you want to follow all the updates, you can do it on the Football.London website. I am, for the third time, it's almost like I'm going to get a subscription at this point, going to be at Ange Postecoglou's press conference this morning. Of course, Spurs last night were beaten by Galatasaray in the Europa League. Exciting stuff, but it does mean that our Tottenham correspondent is currently flying back from Turkey this morning, but Spurs travelled back last night, and I am needed to cover that press conference again. So I'll be at the Tottenham Hotspur training ground a little bit later on this morning to hear the fallout from that rather damning defeat to Victor Osimhen and Galatasaray last night in the Europa League. Right, let's go to part two, though, to get plenty of your questions and more right after this. Okay, part two of the show where we tackle your questions in the chat box. If you could use a little or big capital Q, that really would help me in terms of finding the questions much easier. Damien says, this is starting to sound like treachery now. It's my job. It's my job. I can't help it, mate. I cannot help the fact that I if I'm asked to do it, I can't say no. I mean, I could say no, but I don't want to annoy anyone. So I'm going to say yes. I'm going to go and do it. Plus, the cake's really good. I don't want to be that guy, but the food at the Spurs training ground is good. It's good. I can't lie. It's the only good thing about Tottenham for me. The food's good. Jasper says, so who else will get gardening leave? So we'll have to have a replacement in June. I don't know about anyone else getting gardening leave. It's just Edu. It's just a process. Contracts exist. When you resign, you have to go through a period of gardening leave as well, until you take on that new position. So it's a very normal process. Nothing sinister about it. Logan says, not liking this Martinelli scapegoat agenda from various fan channels and chats. What do you think, Tom? I mean, Martinelli's form has dipped. I don't think it's unfair to point out that Martinelli's form has dipped. I think he's suffered since Calafiori's left the left back slot. I think he's suffering without a left back or necessarily maybe even Moreno's form as well. Moreno's form is affecting it as well. That left hand side without Moreno having bedded in yet and got to full steam and get to in a position where he can really deliver the quality that we know he does have. And with Calafiori also not there, I think Martinelli has suffered without that presence on the left-hand side. So hopefully it changes, but it might be that we need to use someone else. In my changed 11 for Chelsea, I wrote a piece on who the changes I make. I think I discussed putting Jesus on the left-hand side against Chelsea, Havertz and Saka at the front, and having both Martinelli and Trossard on the bench for this game. So that's something that I think we could have considered. Rob says, why are Arsenal paying Edu if he's resigned? That's what gardening leave is. I don't know the finer details of how the payment structures are going on, Rob, but he's on gardening leave for 6 months. So if you know the details about gardening leave, then there you go. Hayler says, with Edu on a 6-month gardening leave, chances for signing players in January are looking gloom, or no, not really. Again, if you listen to the Athletic podcast yesterday, you would have seen that David Ornstein spoke about how the expectation is a lot of plans for January will have already been put in place. Of course, we do have a team that are a recruitment team. It's not just Edu at the club that works on transfers. As we talked about, Jason Ato has been a very, close figure with the team. He's very highly thought of, not just at Arsenal, but among the footballing community as well. You've got head of recruitment there. You've got a lot of people behind the scenes, analytics, scouts, that are all part of that recruitment process. Richard Garlick, of course, will be doing some work in that field as well. Tim Lewis, I imagine, will also be getting involved. So already plans for January will have been underway, will have been spoken about. So it shouldn't affect the January window, other than any of the responsibilities that Edu would have had specifically, or maybe any of his contacts or specific individual ideas. There'll be other ideas. There'll be more input, you think, from Arteta. Arteta may have to do more in terms of kind of negotiation, perhaps, as well, like when speaking to players and things like that. Maybe because Arteta usually gets involved towards the end of the process when he speaks to players, but maybe there'll be a difference there. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. Wilson says, Tottenham, are you serious, Tom? Hey, job's your job, man. You got to do it. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do. I was going to use a different analogy then, but I don't think I should. Damien says, whose food is better, Arsenal's or theirs? To be fair, I've never gone to the Tottenham actual ground yet. I've never been there to work in the press lounge yet, so I can't compare that. Arsenal's food on a match day, though, for the press lounge side of things, is excellent. So, but they've got a very, very good stadium, to be fair to them. So, with apparently a cheese room. I love a cheese room. Just love it. Love a cheese board. Love a cheese room. So, it doesn't stand. I mean, Arsenal are going to have a good competition, that's for sure. But the Arsenal food is excellent. Jasper says, if Rice has indeed broken his toe, can we play him against Chelsea and not let him go to England, as they will ruin him? Unlikely. He's already been called up at this stage. Dancing Bear says, will Edu still deal with transfers while on gardening leave? Was it true that he was in Portugal to talk to Gyökeres? I don't know anything about the Gyökeres thing. Not heard that personally. Edu is not involved in anything from this point forwards. Even though he's on gardening leave, you effectively you're seeing out your contract. However, what you've agreed to, you're not involved. As mentioned before, he's not in any of the Arsenal WhatsApp groups that deal in transfers or anything like that. And if you're thinking, WhatsApp groups, surely it'd be something a bit more official than a WhatsApp. No, it's not. And clubs and agents and intermediaries and players, we all know WhatsApp is a huge part of the transfer process, believe it or not. It's a massive part of it. But he is no longer in those groups. He is not involved in any of these situations. Mickey says, how are you feeling about Chelsea? Do you think they will bounce back? I hate that phrase. You know the reason why I hate that phrase, bounce back? I don't know if you've seen this. But if you type in Ten Hag, what's the plan? Let me see if it comes up. I can't play it because of copyright reasons. But if you... okay, I found it. I'll put a link to it in the chat box because it's on Twitter. It is one of the greatest videos you will ever watch. It's absolutely brilliant. So I'll leave a link to that in the chat. But if you just type in Ten Hag, what's the plan, and you find the video that it includes Dion Dublin quite heavily, one of the best edits you will ever see. And in it, kind of just like, it's all the times he says, we have to stick to the plan. We have to stick to the plan. And at the end of the video, he's like, but what's the real plan? He's like, bounce back. And Dion's like, okay, we have to bounce back. And you realize how many times Ten Hag has said the words bounce back. So I've started to hate the phrase, can Arsenal bounce back? Because I feel like it's more a Ten Hag thing. Can Arsenal respond to their poor run of form? Yes, absolutely they can. We know they've got the quality. It was a better performance against Inter Milan than Newcastle. It was frustrating. It was boring, but it was better. We created more chances. We were dangerous. We deserved more. We were unlucky. But there was still obviously big problems. But it was much better than the Newcastle game. So for that reason, yes, I'm confident we can respond as well. Trotter says Edu is a greedy man. I mean, I don't think Edu is necessarily a greedy man, because that was initially what a lot of people felt, is that Edu had taken a job for the money. But we have since come to learn that Arsenal counter-offered a very similar package, wages-wise, to Edu that was also turned down. So clearly this is not about money. It can't be about money. Otherwise, you know, if it was about money, that he might have, you know, I mean, if it was about money, then it would have had to been like a difference in the wage considerably, and he picks that role. Arsenal apparently counter-offered with a similar offer to that of Marinakis' group, and he still turned Arsenal's offer down because he wanted to go on to the role. It's about the role for Edu, clearly. It's about taking on that role that oversees number of clubs in a multi-club model. That's what he's wanted to do. That's what he believes in. That's the process he wants to go through, and it's become available to him. So clearly it's not about money. It's about wanting to do that role. I'm still critical of it. I still think he's leaving Arsenal half-baked, half-finished in his project that he's invested so much time and effort into. And that's what I'm critical of. But yeah, that's mad. Henke Ho says, when being an Arsenal fan, is it difficult to be a journalist at Tottenham press conferences? Have your colleagues sent you questions before, or do you just stick the knife in? I'll be honest, it's quite funny. The first time I did a Tottenham press conference, as soon as, because obviously I've been, you know, in the space a little while, so I've come to know plenty of the other journalists at the moment now. And as soon as I walked in the doors at Spurs, two people turned around and were like, "What's this Arsenal fella doing here?" Which I was like, "Keep it quiet, guys. Come on." But yeah, it's weird, but it's just, at the end of the day, it's my job. I have to do that. It's a very nice training complex. You can't deny that. It's very impressive. But although I did have to park in like a field last time because they had a really big kind of events day on, so the parking was completely rammed, and I was like parked outside the training ground in this little field, which was not the most secure in the world. I'll put that out there. Damien says Edu resigned and is working his notice period as the club don't want him seeing what they are planning. They've put him on gardening leave. Either way, they would be paying him. Process says, Tom, with you now being... I'm not even answering that. Mars Cannon says, Rich Kanu, he's getting paid by Arsenal, not working for them, basically. That's how it works. Yeah, it's just gardening leave. Just do your research on what gardening leave is. Anne says, Tom, is there any truth in the rumours that Santi was interested in taking Edu's role? Heard absolutely nothing to suggest that whatsoever. Mickey says, oh my God, Tom has never answered one of my questions before. I'm so gassed. I'm sorry if I've missed your questions before. It's certainly not been intentional. Clive says it's more like a notice period for Edu. Yeah, I mean, there you go. It's just a notice period. Like, it's just seeing it out. But he's not involved in anything that's going on. And says, Tom, who would you like to see as the new sporting director? I've spoken about this before. Simon Rolfs at Bayer Leverkusen would be my personal choice. I think the work that's gone on there to build that squad, to construct a group that have gone unbeaten in the Bundesliga is another great example of European success. Some of the signings that they've made, some of the players they've brought through, the players they've signed up to new contracts. I think the work that's gone on there would be great. Clive says, if you want to leave, you can't work for 6 months elsewhere. But if Arsenal fired you, they are duty bound to pay you for the same 6-month period in your contract. So Thank you, Clive. Always the voice of reason, giving us plenty of insight there. Amira says, have you seen that our UEFA Women's Champions League game against Munich needs to find a new venue because of our Carabao Cup game? Tickets have been on sale since September. Another step back for the women's game, in my opinion. I don't think so as much. Like the League Cup game against Crystal Palace, I understand why people are going to raise this as the men's game taking more importance than the women's game. It's not as cut and dry as that. The schedule for the men's team is far more difficult to rearrange that cup game, whereas there is more flexibility for that Women's Champions League game to be moved. If, for our understanding, it'll be moved to another day in the Emirates Stadium because they've been selling tickets for a game at the Emirates Stadium. That Carabao Cup game against Palace, you'd expect, is also likely to sell more tickets. But it's not to do with that. It's purely to do with the schedule. It's much easier to move the Champions League game at the Emirates between Arsenal and Bayern Munich in the women's side of things than it is to reschedule a Crystal Palace League Cup game for both sides, where the schedule simply does not allow Arsenal to move that men's game. So it's not a step back. It's purely because of the scheduling and it being more flexible to move the women's game than it is for the men's game to be put elsewhere. So it's actually not that bad at all. And, I would call it out if it was genuinely a step back, because we've not hidden away from those topics at all. So if I thought that was the case, I would say it, but it's just to do with the scheduling. What about Mikel Edwards? I mean, Mikel Edwards is back at Liverpool, is he not? So why would we? Yeah, he's back at Liverpool as a CEO, I think, now. So that's not going to happen. Gooner says, Tom, it's not a notice period when it's your company doesn't trust you or want you near their business. I think you're reading way too much into this, mate. Way too much. Clive has explained it to you. If you want to leave, you can't work for 6 months elsewhere. And if Arsenal fired you, they would be duty bound to pay you. So it's really not. It's not as bad as what you think. Trevor says, have some of you never heard of the word ambition? Tom had it when he left teaching for journalism. I mean, I don't think it's anything to do with that. It was to do with ambition, of course. It was more for me, though, about mental health and happiness. I was miserable teaching. Not that I didn't enjoy the actual teaching aspects. You put me in that classroom and I'll do the absolute best job I can, because I enjoyed the teaching aspect. Everything else outside of that classroom, the politics, the planning, the marking, and look, I work incredibly hard. I basically do 2 jobs now. I'm working from 7 a.m. to however late at night, doing these 2 jobs, but I enjoy it. It's fun. I'm very privileged to do what I do. With teaching, it's just not worth it for me. It wasn't worth it. It was destroying me. So it was about, yes, it was ambition, sure, to chase this dream of doing football as a job, but it was also about being happy, because it just wasn't. Teaching is whenever I hear friends of mine who've got kids that are going into it, or former colleagues of mine, or people thinking about switching careers, and they're like, Tom, I know you used to be a teacher. Would you go into teaching? And for any people that are listening that are considering it, if you get a good school, it can be great. I should say that it's not always bad. I've had a bad experience, and other people's experiences aren't always going to be bad, but I'd never ever recommend it to anybody. And for anyone that does it, it's a massive, kind of rewarding job in a way, but it's just not for me. Paul says, wow, yesterday's likes, I know it's harsh after a defeat, but we've only got 640. The way of good morning, Tom, of the Teach to Go community. Look, I know I've had a few people message me saying, is the 1K challenge over? The 1K challenge was a brilliant thing that we did on the channel for a year, and it was in a way, it was momentum. We were doing really well. We were not losing games. But I'm not going to come onto the channel and be like, let's get the show to 1,000 likes, when I know you're not enjoying the games at the moment. I know not everyone's tuning in to the same degree as they were before, because the mood is on the floor right now. So I empathize with that. I'm not going to be like, I say at the start of the shows, if you want to like the video, please do. If you want to help us out, please like the video. But the 1K challenge, I can't demand that of people when Arsenal have been so poor. I'm not going to be sitting here and, begging us to get over to 1,000 likes on a video when I know the mood is like down here. Like, it would just be, it'd feel wrong at that point to do it. So if you want to like the video, like the video. But I'm not expecting it at all. Manoj says, I completely understand you, Tom. I left teaching after a year. I loved the teaching aspect, but I'm now in IT in a school and it's the same, but I needed a break into IT somehow to bite the bullet. Yeah, fair play to you, mate. Clive says, Arsenal women playing tonight at the Emirates against Brighton. Definitely worth a visit if it's local for you, as Clive says. Make sure if you can get down there, get down there. Go and give the girls the support because they need it. It's not been the best start of the season. A lot of change, a lot of upheaval. Renee's doing as good a job as she can. And the process I've heard about, to replace Jonas Eidevall is not going to be a quick turnaround. To my understanding, it's going to be a longer process to replace Jonas. Amira says, actually, Tom, as far as I know, the Champions League game for the women's will be played on the same day. We're still trying to find a new venue. Meadow Park doesn't meet the UEFA requirements, but negotiations are still ongoing. That's interesting. So let's wait and see, I guess, what happens with the rescheduling of that. Meadow Park no way would reach the requirements at all. So yeah, interesting. Soup says, personally, I've never been a teacher. The way I see kids and parents at times treat teachers, I wouldn't have the restraint or the patience. You do need patience. Yeah, the stories. I've got some hella stories, but like it's mad. Some like the days you go in, you just treated like absolute crap. Like really are treated horrendously. Clive says, Tom, to be fair, you've always spoken about the multi-club model. Is this our next ambition? It may need to be. Clearly, Clive, I don't think that it is the club's ambition. Because in my mind, I think this would have been something that Edu would have been very keen on. A multi-club model. Clearly, by the way, he's left to go and join a position to head up a multi-club model. I'm a fan of Arsenal doing it. I'm not a fan of the concept. The concept, I think, is something that should have been regulated out of the game a long time ago. But, the horse has bolted at this point. There's no going back at this point. Because you can't just disband the City Football Group. You can't stop the clubs that have got all these links to one another. You can't stop the Red Bull process. It's done. And I personally feel that because it's a thing, Arsenal shouldn't restrain themselves. They shouldn't disadvantage themselves through principle. A multi-club model with Arsenal at its core and at its top and at the top of its hierarchy clearly would be very beneficial. Because you look at City in the summer, a market that did not have the best players to move, they landed a very good forward in Savinho, who has been developed through that City Football Group. People were like, look at City, they signed that Savinho in the summer. Look at Arsenal, they didn't bring any forwards in. City signed Savinho like 3 years ago. Savinho was signed from Brazil to Troyes 3 years ago. He's gone on loan to PSV. He's gone on loan to Girona and then come back to Troyes and then signed for Man City. That's not them signing Savinho in the summer. They signed Savinho 3 years ago to their multi-club model. And that's the difference. And that's why I think Arsenal are at a disadvantage by not going down that multi-club model route. I'm not a fan of the whole multi-club model thing as a concept, and it should have never been allowed to happen. But now it is a thing. It's like the Super League thing. We can all wince, cry, moan, and beg about the Super League. But if it was a thing, it's not like I'd want Arsenal to hamstring themselves and not go into it. Arsenal has to be at the forefront. Arsenal has to be put first, and Arsenal needs to be benefited in the best ways possible all the time. So if a new thing happens, you have to get with the program. And I think that's the case with the multi-club model. And it's obvious that Arsenal and the people at Arsenal aren't clear and aren't keen on that. Because if they were, I think Edu's desire and ambition to work in that multi-club model type structure and environment would have seen Arsenal go into that. But clearly that's not a thing right now. That's going to bring us to the end of today's show. Thank you so much, as always, for tuning in. Absolute pleasure to chat with you. I will speak with you bright and early tomorrow morning. We will have a preview show at some point. I'm sure ahead of that Chelsea game. I just need to work out when I can fit it into my schedule. But there will be a preview show at some stage, either today or tomorrow. Have a fantastic day. Enjoy yourselves. Stay safe. Stay well. Stay happy and respectful. And as always, up the Arsenal.